webinars are made possible thanks to generous donor support. If you'd like to contribute, please visit our website, autism.org.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for being here today. We're talking about self-care, which I know as well as any of you know is so much easier said than done, but it is valuable and it's worth it. And we're going to talk about why and what it is, what it's not, and how you can incorporate it into a way that is useful and helpful in your lives. So today I'm going to talk about the current face of mental health in the United States. I'm going to talk about some of the problems with the way most of us think about self-care, and then reframing self-care into a more helpful, more useful model. And I'm going to leave you with 3 important questions to ponder to help you figure out what you need and how you can incorporate effective self-care into your lives. So let's get started with the current face of mental health in the US. And I think the current face is this. Pretty apt for our day and age, right? I know, I think almost all of us feel like that most days. Since the pandemic began in 2020, there's been a significant increase in the number of people seeking mental health support. This graph shows the number of people who took the online mental health screening from Mental Health America. This does not represent the number of people who got help or the number of people who got diagnoses, but the increase is astonishing, over 500% from 2019. Rates of anxiety, depression, and suicidality all follow the same trend, with a huge jump in early to mid-2020, remaining high through 2021. And based on my clinical experience, I would be surprised if the data for 2022 shows a significant improvement. I would expect it to be very similar to 2021. Unfortunately, access to treatment has not kept pace with the exponential need. Again, according to Mental Health America, those not receiving treatment for a mental health problem continues to increase. The largest increases in the percentage of people not getting treatment were on the parent screen, followed by young people. So mental health overall is in crisis, and mental health care is inaccessible to many. And now we add in high needs kiddos, aging parents, other caregivers, other stressors into the mix. And as I go through this presentation, I'm speaking about all of these. Caregivers of people with disabilities, adult siblings or partners who need more support, aging parents, kids with autism, and so many others. If you're an exhausted and overwhelmed caregiver, this presentation is for you. There are stressors related to the emotions and logistics of a person's special needs, diagnosis, treatment. These same caregivers face relationship challenges. Connection with others is a protective factor to depression and anxiety and so many other mental health disorders. So loss of relationships or ineffective relationships can have a big impact. Family needs are always great, and caregivers fight to find a balance for the needs of everyone in the household, and especially themselves, who they often put on the back burner in favor of everyone else. So it's no surprise that rates of burnout are especially high. This is true for the population at large, but especially for caregivers of all kinds. According to numerous studies, parents of children with disabilities are at an increased risk of mental health challenges. More specifically, parents of children with autism are at a higher risk for acute and chronic stress than parents of children with other developmental conditions and parents of children without disabilities. First, caregivers of those with high needs face greater time and financial demands. They have to carve out more time for doctor's appointments, therapies. This can lead to a loss of income from time off work, increased expenses for transportation, medical costs, childcare, and more emotional energy for just keeping track of schedules, medications, data collection, so much more. And it's not uncommon for families to have to make the difficult decision to relocate to receive the best care, or in some cases, appropriate care at all. Caregivers who are new to a diagnosis or condition feel especially overwhelmed, both with grief about the meaning and the expectations of that condition, and about navigating this complex system of getting care. Parents of children with autism are also at higher risk of experiencing anger, depression, and anxiety shortly after a diagnosis. And these symptoms and feelings, it will persist well after that diagnosis, but it often is relieved or eases over time. But when the dust settles and the care has started, it remains a lot to manage. So you may have mental health conditions, stressors of life, add to that caregiving for those with high needs, and this can affect relationships. In romantic relationships, we see higher divorce rates and lower relationship satisfaction. And it's common for those in these circumstances to report that their relationship with their significant other becomes less of a priority compared to all there is to do and worry about for your dependents, the rest of your family, everything else going on in your lives. Some describe that this relationship becomes similar to a business partnership, where time spent together is planning for getting everyone's needs met, finances, the upcoming schedule. And many report taking stress and anger out on their partner, or the reverse, feeling like their partner takes their stress and anger out on them, and also report feeling misunderstood, taken for granted, and not validated by their partner. Relationship problems may also arise within your friendships. You might feel like you don't relate to your friends anymore. They can't understand your problems and the life situations that you're dealing with. Or maybe it seems like their problems are insignificant compared to yours. In addition to these feelings, you just might not have time to spend with your friends due to your extra busy schedule and all that there is on your plate. You might be dealing with a child who's experiencing self-regulatory problems, intense and challenging behaviors, social difficulties. Maybe you have a parent with dementia who can no longer meet their physical needs. And you have a household to run. Maybe other kids who need your time and attention and have their own schedules and homework and obligations. The family's physical and mental health concerns, your own stuff, obligations, appointments, things you need to do. The car needs an oil change and you have to take that package to the post office. And I haven't even mentioned the time and effort and obligations that you may have for your employment. So it's no wonder that so many describe themselves as experiencing burnout. Mothers of children with disabilities were found to have higher emotional exhaustion rates, higher emotional exhaustion rates and lower rates of personal accomplishment, leading to an increased rate of burnout. There's less research, but similar effects have been found when looking at fathers of children with disabilities. Let's talk a little bit more about that word burnout. You may have heard the term burnout in reference to working too much, but it can also apply to parenting. Parenting is work. Parental burnout is an exhaustion syndrome caused by a gap between parenting resources and parenting demands. According to the APA Dictionary of Psychology, burnout is physical, emotional, or mental exhaustion accompanied by decreased motivation, lowered performance, and negative attitudes towards oneself. Excuse me. Burnout may cause you to feel constantly run down, feel like all the responsibility for caring for your loved ones falls on you, feel like you have no time for yourself. People often report resentment toward those they're caring for, the tasks needing to be done, the other people involved. To some extent, exhaustion is normal. We all feel like that sometimes, but it becomes problematic when it affects your ability to do the things you need to do. The symptoms of burnout are similar in a lot of ways to the symptoms of depression. So what's the difference? The differences come down to severity, improvement, and terminology. Burnout is characterized as an occupational phenomenon, not a medical condition. As stated earlier, parental burnout is an exhaustion syndrome caused between gap in parenting resources and demands. Depression is a clinical medical diagnosis. The symptoms of depression must last for at least 2 weeks for a person to meet criteria for the diagnosis, but they often last much longer. Burnout does not have a minimum time requirement, but if it lasts for a long time, it would probably meet criteria for depression. The symptoms for the two are very similar. Feeling too exhausted to do things and having low motivation to do the things you enjoy is an indication of burnout, which is similar to the depression symptom of anhedonia, which says you have little interest or pleasure in doing the things you like to do, in addition to low motivation and low energy. They're very similar. Depression maybe being more severe. Physical symptoms are also on the list for both. GI issues, headaches, problems sleeping, changes in appetite. Again, depression symptoms are maybe more severe, but it really just comes down to terminology in a lot of ways. Burnout being an occupational phenomenon and depression being a medical diagnosis, their different definitions and lists of symptoms are more aligned with those categories. Resentment toward others and burnout and irritability and depression, very similar. Feelings of failure in your role for burnout and feelings of worthlessness and depression, again, very similar. Social isolation is a symptom of both. Difficulty concentrating, a symptom of both. The last factor that is somewhat different between the two is improvement. Ideally, burnout would improve if you stepped away from your role, got a sufficient break, and maybe once symptoms improve, you could go back to that role, or maybe you would leave it completely. Depression is a mood disorder, so it does not depend on any specific stressor. If you're burnout and you leave your role, it would not be the cure for depression. It might bring short-term relief, but you would likely continue to experience symptoms. Remember, it's possible that what started out as burnout has turned into depression. The research shows that a combination of psychotherapy and medication is the most effective treatment for depression. And as we've already discussed, as a prolonged negative event, the COVID pandemic has added to the pre-existing conditions that caregivers face by increasing anxiety, depression, and loneliness. According to a 2021 study, vulnerable social groups such as students and the elderly are at an increased risk of struggling with mental health during negative life events like the pandemic. Young people and elderly people may be the groups that you're caring for, possibly adding a layer to your caregiver responsibilities. And another study looked at the impact of the pandemic on mental health and well-being and social support of caregivers of children with neurodevelopmental conditions. The researchers found that 76% of caregivers reported that COVID had an impact on their well-being. 73% reported difficulty balancing work with caregiver and family responsibilities, and 43% reported a worsening of pre-existing mental health conditions. Many parents reported worrying about future isolation periods, the stability of their living situation, and about financial problems as a result of the pandemic. So caregivers with loved ones for high support needs are dealing with all of these factors and more. They still need to be there for their loved ones. They still have all these responsibilities that aren't just going to go away. No one should be expected to or should have to do this alone, but there is so much responsibility and stress put on one person. And the reality for many single parents or solo caregivers is that they do it alone. There are no breaks. And that's why self-care is essential now and always. Taking care of yourself improves the quality of life for the caregiver and the individual they're caring for. but the common ideas about self-care aren't practical, realistic, or helpful for many caregivers. First, the way society is structured does not support self-care. Kelly McGonigal, a health psychologist at Stanford, said that she often hears people say, I can't invest in things that are good for me because it's taking away my ability to be a good parent or do what I need to do at work. We are made to believe that we have to do everything for our families or at work to be happy and successful. But often trying to do everything for everyone has the opposite effect. It leaves you unhappy and feeling unsuccessful. It is a bar that you can never meet. There are always a million things on our to-do list. It never ends. And these things are important, but so are you. Self-care is also hard to achieve when we have a fixed view of what it's supposed to look like. When our hopes for self-care become our expectations, we're setting ourselves up for failure. And the way we talk about self-care in media and culture furthers this self-care ideal that is impossible to achieve. For example, a 3-mile walk in nature might be your dream self-care activity. It really works for you. And if you have the time and the energy to take a 3-mile walk in nature every day, then great. That's a wonderful self-care method for you. But on most days, you definitely don't have the time or the energy to do that. This walk is just not going to happen. A yoga retreat or a massage might sound great. That would be self-care. But who has the time or the money for it? At least not on a regular basis. Self-care rituals like a vacation or eating a 4-course meal at a nice restaurant, retail therapy, cleaning the whole house, just might not be realistic. And in fact, might even add to your burnout, your stress, your to-do list. Knowing what works to take care of yourself is not the same as being able to do it. You have to play around to find something that's going to work for you. Remember that once a self-care option becomes inaccessible, you know that going for that walk would work for you, but it's not going to happen. We can't write off self-care altogether. Just because you can't take a long vacation doesn't mean you can't take care of yourself. Have a variety of options that are possible to achieve when it's a good day and when it's not. There are plenty of opportunities for self-care that don't require money or an unreasonable amount of time or effort. And I'm going to go into some examples of those. Here are just a couple. We'll talk more about this in a few minutes. But some small examples of self-care. Again, I realize that these are much easier said than done. But this is just a starting point to figure out how they might work for you. When you're feeling stressed, overworked, extra tired, have a bad day, things like being able to say no, going for quality over quantity, getting outside, getting creative. There are things you can do for yourself even when you're not feeling 100%. Excuse me. Another thing that hinders your ability to practice self-care is this idealization of actions that we can document or track, like exercising 30 minutes a day for 4 days in a row. Can cross each day off the calendar. Yes, I did it. Crossing everything off your to-do list. I can see that I was productive. This gives us satisfaction and provides evidence that we're doing a good job. Now, how is our parenting or work life similar to this? Are you good enough when you can show your worth? Do you need to show how productive you are to be worthy? However, a lot of times we need to do less to feel better, like taking a nap or deciding that the dishes can wait until tomorrow, or just allowing yourself to have a minute for laughter. Doing less does not mean you are failing, does not mean you are lazy, does not mean you are not deserving. You don't need to earn that nap. You don't need to earn rest. You probably know that intellectually, that rest is needed now and for better performance in the future. But for so many people, our feelings and negative beliefs about ourselves make it hard to make that decision for ourselves. In some ways, the non-prioritization of self-care might actually go all the way back to early experiences or core beliefs about ourselves. Or maybe we learned, if I'm good enough, I will be loved, or I have to earn love, or I don't deserve what I need. Just some things to think about. Where did you learn that you are less important, or that your self-care needs are lesser than everyone else's needs? We hear self-care all the time from so many sources in our lives and in our culture, as if it's just this quick and easy thing that if we would just do it or make the time for it, it would solve all of our problems and our anxiety would go away. But we all know that's not true. So I'd like to now reframe the idea of self-care into something that might be more useful and meaningful to your lives. Author Tara Parker Pope from the New York Times states that self-care is ultimately about setting priorities, setting boundaries, and finding purpose. But society often tells us that putting ourselves first is selfish, and setting firm boundaries comes off as cold and mean. And what does finding purpose really mean anyway? We learn early on that making yourself a priority and setting boundaries is not okay, especially for women. We all already have a list of priorities for our lives, things that are most important to us and that we are going to make sure gets done and taken care of, for our present, for our future, for our day-to-day, children, partner, work. We have to add ourselves to that list of priorities. Start small if it's helpful. We can make 10 minutes of alone time in the morning, or take a shower every day a priority. Very small things. Making ourselves a priority allows us to feel refreshed, happier, experience a shift in energy, and ultimately be more available and helpful to those who need us. When we try to help others, when we're depleted, we're not usually that helpful. Caregivers of high support needs dependents are often motivated to help others and dismiss their own needs. So maybe it would be helpful to tell yourself that you're actually helping others when you practice self-care. By making yourself a priority, you'll have so much more energy and a greater capacity to better serve yourself and others. So it might be easier to at first kind of trick yourself into practicing self-care for the benefit of others. If I take care of myself, I can better help somebody else. But work on reframing these thoughts over time. What are the thoughts that come up about being selfish and cold, or feelings about guilt, taking time for yourself? Practicing things like, I deserve to be taken care of just like any other human being, or I'm not responsible for fixing it all, or if it doesn't get done, somehow it's going to be okay. Boundaries are an important step of self-care as well. A boundary is simply a limit to what you will do and what you are willing to take on as your responsibility. It's often helpful to set boundaries before you have to enforce them, so that others can understand this boundary. And when it comes up in the moment and you say, nope, I'm not going to do that, then there's this confusion or someone going, what do you mean you're not going to do it? Well, if you're not going to do it, how's it going to get done? I feel hurt that you have said that. So set the boundaries in advance, talk about them before they become necessary, so that everyone knows what's happening when you enforce a boundary. For example, maybe you decide to set a boundary with your partner that on days when you are exhausted and overwhelmed, you are not going to talk about logistical or practical things that need to be taken care of, like paying bills or the schedule for the next couple of days. You'll want to share this boundary with your partner when you're in a good headspace and before the need to enforce it arises. In the future, when your partner says, hey, can we talk about this? You have the option to say, yes, absolutely, or no, I have had a rough day and I'm just not up for it today. Your partner might have an easier time accepting those boundaries in the moment if they are explained beforehand, and you won't feel like you're being a bad partner, won't feel like there's that there's a rejection going on between the two of you. By sharing boundaries in advance, there's more realistic and less hurtful meaning that comes from a loving boundary. Maybe one way that you start setting boundaries now is to decide not to stop what you're doing when someone asks you to do something else. You're going to finish what you're doing first. Your child asks you to make them a sandwich while you're in the middle of loading the dishwasher. You decide, I'm going to finish with the dishwasher before I'm going to make them a sandwich. Put what you're doing first, even if it's not important. Even if, loading the dishwasher is something that could wait, but it's what you're doing right now. You don't have to stop everything you're doing, drop all of it to make somebody else happy. You'll get the bike out of the garage after you finish sending this email. You'll help them once you get to a stopping point. You don't drop everything just because someone asks you to do something else. Can you leave the house for your me time? If there's no one to interrupt you, you can actually do what you're trying to do. Maybe your boundary is that you're leaving the house at 6:30 every night for 10 minutes to go for a walk, to read a book in private, get away from all the things that are going to take you away from yourself, from your self-care. Boundaries apply to your work life too. In what ways are your time and energy commitments too much at work? And in an ideal world, where would you set that boundary? How can you communicate with your supervisor and be assertive about non-negotiables? You get a say. And speaking of non-negotiables, some boundaries and priorities need to be non-negotiable. It might help to refer to Maslow's hierarchy of needs for these. In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, our biological needs are at the bottom of this pyramid, and every set of needs beyond that builds on what's below it. So physiological needs, basic biology, is the bottom of everything. If your biological needs are not met, you cannot meet any higher needs. So food, water, sleep, exercise. And then the next on the pyramid is safety needs. Physically, are you in a safe space? Is there a threat to your life? Is there a potential threat to your life? You live in a dangerous area. Even if there's not a threat immediately in front of you, the possibility of that is real. So emotional safety is just as important. Can you feel safe when you are safe? And then beyond that, it's love and belonging, forming meaningful connections with each other, counting on other people for support, feeling a connectedness among individuals and community. Beyond that is esteem, positive beliefs about ourselves, our competence, we can do it, we have value. And finally, self-actualization, following our passions, becoming the person that we want to be. So if we think about non-negotiables, let's start at the bottom of this pyramid. Physical, biological. How much water are you drinking? Are you sleeping? Are you getting enough to eat during the day? Are you a stressed non-eater? Are you moving? How much of your day are you in one place? And then safety needs are one step above physical needs. Also a non-negotiable. How much are you watching the news? Are you consuming so much negative, so much hurt, so much scary stuff that is out of your control? As you scroll through social media, are you seeing these same kinds of news articles? As you scroll through social media, are you seeing fights and insults and name calling and really hurtful things? These have an effect on us, even if they don't apply to us. Seeing it has an effect on us. let's say your social media is nothing but people who you know and love posting happy pictures of their lives. How does that feel? Do you feel like you're missing out? Do you feel disappointed in your life compared to theirs? Not their real life, but their social media curated life. So, recognizing what you're consuming and how that might affect your anxiety, your mood, how you see life, how you see the world. So those are most important non-negotiables. And then love and belonging is also really important. As I said earlier, social support, connection with other people is really a protective factor against anxiety and depression and other mental health conditions. So how can you incorporate more social interaction, more connection with other people into your life? Is there a person, a family, or a family member or a friend who you can send a text to when you're having a rough day and just say, things are really hard right now? You don't even need a response, just to get it out of your body, to say it to another person. And if they can respond with some sort of an affirmation or say, I hear you, you're doing great, even better, but just to get it out and to make a connection with another person. And if you can, spending time with another person is even better. I shouldn't say that, not even better, but also very valuable. So how can you incorporate more social in any way, shape, or form? So through these steps of self-care, purpose will arise. This purpose does not have to be life-altering. When you take time to be with yourself and for yourself, you can start to relearn what you like to do, what brings you joy, how you can spread love and joy to others. This can give you purpose in your daily activities, your career, the role you play in your family. Self-care allows us to have more control over our lives and have a better sense of how to execute this control. What do we want to be to the world? Purpose can be advocacy and external, pushing a cause that's important to you and that benefits others. And this is often energizing and an uplifting experience. But it also puts us at risk of more burnout and overwhelm if we take on too much or invest too much in a cause. There's a lot that's out of your control when it comes to a macro issue. Purpose can also be about finding yourself and spending time with your passions. What kind of leisure activities are restful or spark your interest? And how can you incorporate more of that into a week? And this brings us to the next idea that I want to cover, filling your cup. You're probably familiar with the metaphor, fill your cup, for self-care, which says you can't fill from an empty cup. The implication being that you can't take care of someone else if you are not in your best condition. You fill your cup by doing things that energize you or that make you feel fulfilled, and you empty your cup by doing things that deplete your energy or require more than you have to give. And it's that simple, right? When you're spent, do one of those self-care activities and you'll be back on top. Go spend an hour in your garden and everything will be great. Even if that were the case, how are you going to find an hour to spend in your garden, to go to that yoga class, to meet your friends for coffee or happy hour? That's not realistic in your world. But the filling your cup metaphor is still valuable. We just need to rethink it. Instead of thinking about your cup as being full or empty and doing things to fill your cup all the way up, we need to instead think about not letting the cup get completely empty and filling the cup a little bit at a time. Your cup might never have a full 8 ounces in it. It might only be a quarter of the way full. And if that's the best you can do right now, that is enough. Your goal needs not to be a full cup, but to prevent emptying the cup. Now, in our society, there is such an emphasis on output and what you produce, which is often a huge contributor to burnout. If you have just a little bit left in your gas tank, you can keep going. That's not the message I want to be encouraging. I want to be able to say, when you're below half full, it's time for a rest. But for this audience, that's just not real. We need to hope for and work toward a new social reality where it's not about how much can you produce and giving it your all until you have nothing left. But that's our current context. So this idea of self-care fits the way that we currently live. Schedule short, easy self-care activities throughout your day or in combination with other obligations. If you can do something longer and more involved, great. But on most days you can't, so think small and frequent. Make a list of self-care activities for yourself that are realistic, simple, repeatable. I'm going to give a few examples in just a minute. And maybe you set timers on your phone or add calendars so that you remember to do them and make them a routine. If they're part of your routine, you're more likely to do them. These activities can be anything that shifts your energy, shifts your awareness, even for only a short time, or even if just a very slight shift. Now, here is a short list of ideas for self-care to get you started thinking about what would be on your list. Give yourself 5 extra minutes in the shower, a hot shower. Set a timer so you don't cheat yourself. Spend the extra money on some gourmet coffee and put a Post-it above the coffee maker to remind yourself to intentionally enjoy it. Take 5 minutes in the car. Just go to your car for 5 minutes to listen to music or listen to a podcast. Reinvigorate an old interest or passion of yours by listening to podcasts or watching documentaries, things that you can just turn on in the background as background noise, or just watch or listen to a little bit of as you have time. Giving yourself timeouts. Take a few minutes alone, regardless of what's going on outside that room that you're putting yourself in. It's going to be okay. Whatever is the problem you're escaping will still be there when you get back. No one is going to be hurt or dead, and if they will, it's not a good time for a timeout. And by the way, if you use timeout as part of your parenting, if your kids have timeouts when they need them, this type of strategy is also a reframe for your kids about what a timeout is. It's not punishment, but rather a time to re-regulate. And I, as your parent, also need timeout sometimes. Incorporate small movements into your day. Right now, everyone in the audience, stand up and sit down 3 times. That's it. It's that simple. What do you notice? Is there a little bit of a shift in your energy? Is there a little bit of a shift in your awareness? What you're paying attention to? That's what we're looking for. Do mindfulness exercise or short meditations. You can use an app. Most apps have really short, like 1 or 2 minute activities. Do one of those each day at a certain time. Make lists that include need tos and want tos. Your to-do list is forever long, and there's no way you're going to get through all of it every day. But we want to. We want to take every free moment to check something else off the list. I have just a few minutes. Maybe I can get this done. But maybe we don't need to do that. Some things can't wait, but others can. So make a list of what you need to do and what you would like to do. Things that you can put on the back burner to give yourself time to rest if needed. Take a few minutes to look at pictures of loved ones or funny memes or reels, anything that just makes you smile. And even better, maybe you can share them with a friend, have someone that you can text these to. Use your senses. Just take 30 seconds to do something with your hands. Put them in some sort of even just rub it on your table and bring all your awareness to that. Your hair, just bring all your awareness to the way that your hair feels in your hands. Your bare feet on your carpet below your feet, just rub it back and forth. Just bring all your awareness to some sort of sensory experience. Just again, a very short time. And finally, I am giving you permission to give your kids screen time while you turn off your brain and take time for yourself. It's okay. It's okay to do that. It's okay to do what you have to do to get that time for yourself. There will always be things that consume our energy throughout the day. Will there always be things to give us energy? Maybe not. You may have to be intentional about it. So this is just a graphical representation of this idea with the cups. You start the day with 10 minutes of alone time, gets you feeling a little bit more refreshed and ready for whatever's going to come next today. And then as soon as you wake up your kid for school, they have a meltdown. Very energy depleting. Not how you wanted to start your day, but also takes a lot out of you to get your kiddo out of that state and ready to go. So you do a 5-minute mindfulness exercise before you get in the car and go, feeling a little bit better, a little bit more ready for whatever comes next. But then once you get to school, you have to have some sort of a meeting. Maybe it's an ARD meeting, or maybe it's a meeting with the principal. Always hard, always energy consuming, never energy giving. You go back home, have a house to clean, there's dishes to be done. You have to do them this morning or today, or you're not going to have what you need to make dinner tonight. And finally, you start your actual job, the stuff that you have to do for your work. And that's also taxing. It's lots of energy depleting events. So you take a nice warm shower or bath, give yourself just a little bit more so you can keep going. You never get your cup filled to the top on a day like this. And that's okay. You're just stopping to give yourself enough to do the things you need to do. I also think that our culture needs to shift away from this idea of self-care in favor of community care. We can't do it alone, and that's largely why we're in this position of burnout. Community care is a much more helpful model for our mental health. Our social structure is not very well set up for community care, especially for multidimensional caregivers and dependents with high support needs. Recommendations for support groups and respite care are some of the most common requests I get, and I don't have a lot of resources for those. Humans are social creatures. We are built to be with and to depend on other people. Do you have one friend or family member who you can vent to? And as if you need something else for your to-do list or to make you feel like you're failing, I'm asking you to add one more because it's important and it has long-term value. Attend events where people in similar situations will be. Get to know your community. The principle of universality is a powerful one. We feel relief when we see that we're not alone. And importantly, this community also has your information about resources, where to go for whatever you need, who's good at this or that, all the things that you're trying to figure out, they are too, or they already have. You might be able to build closer relationships within this community to rely on each other for caregiving support. Maybe another family can offer babysitting or respite for a short period. Maybe they give your loved one some much needed social opportunity that you can't get from your other friend circles. Being part of a community is key. Think about the pods that people developed when COVID first started. Do you remember the pods where maybe a group of families would decide on a set of rules or expectations about exposure risks and how much risk they were bringing into this group of people who all decided on similar protective factors and protective levels from COVID, and then they would all get together and be physically together. A lot of people did this for homeschooling. They would form groups of kids, again, similar risk levels, similar precaution levels, and form homeschool pods. What if you could have a pod of people you could count on for respite or for some of your household responsibilities, and you would take on some for them? You're there for each other when needed. And as I just said, humans are social creatures. We just lived through a period of recalibrating to meet the social needs of humans during a pandemic where we all had to stay at home, couldn't be physically together. We use virtual environments to keep feelings of connectedness and to meet the needs of our daily lives. Are there ways you can leverage our increased virtual world for your self-care? Online workout or meditation classes. There are some that are 10 minutes or less. Self-paced classes on an interest or dealing with the diagnosis at hand. Virtual therapies or classes on preferred interest to occupy your loved one for a short time. During the pandemic, a lot of people did Zoom happy hours or Zoom game nights. Is that still an option for some of your social group? So I want to leave you with 3 questions to ask yourself and figure out how these might apply to your self-care. What brings you joy? What makes you smile? Very small moments of smiling, of laughter, of joy go a long way in shifting our mood, shifting our awareness, our attention, our energy. How can you incorporate more of those tiny little micro moments of joy, of laughter? Number 2, what is your unmet need or probably many needs? Is it not having enough support? Is it not having the right medical providers in place to help with whatever your loved one is going through? Is it financial? Is it access to food or the things that you need? And number 3, what prevents you from getting that need met? Some of these barriers are real. Sometimes there just is not a doctor in this area who can treat this condition. And that is a really bad position to be in. There's no easy fix for that. If you don't have access to food, sometimes there aren't a lot of options. But some barriers are self-inflicted. Are you afraid to ask for help? Are you afraid of being a burden? Does it feel like if you don't get it all done, that you're not enough or that you're failing? If so, these are some ideas. These are some barriers, some emotional barriers that maybe some reframing or figuring out where these beliefs came from can make a big difference. Okay, I used a lot of research and the work of other folks to create this presentation, and I am more than happy to share my references list for anyone who wants it. We've got about 10 minutes for questions. I'm happy to take anything, and I'm going to leave you with this slide up with some resources that, if you find helpful, they are available to you.
Amanda, thank you so much for that presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. I hope that the audience can take something away from it that will be helpful.
Yes, and for that first 10 minutes, we did have some intermittent audio. It was okay for a while, and then it started to get more glitchy. I was about to jump in when you froze. So we can probably re-record that maybe right afterwards if you have time, or we could do it another time. But for everyone who's here, if you were unable to hear everything at the beginning, we will re-record that, and then we can post that when we do the final playback.
Okay.
All right. Well, we do have some questions. So I know we've only got about 9 more minutes. So if people are typing their questions in the Q&A, we will get to as many as possible. So I'm going to actually check. There were a couple of questions in the chat as well. So one of the first questions was about when you're a single parent. And I know you touched quite a bit on creating community, but can you amplify that for parents who are experiencing this as a single parent, how they can really find those connections?
Yeah, for the single parents, the solo caregivers, it is really hard. There is no break. And this is one of those barriers that there's not an easy fix for. So if there's not family or friends that you can count on for occasional respite, for occasional relief, it's so important that you find some sort of a community. Maybe it's a community based on the challenges that you're experiencing, some sort of an autism parents community, for example, an aging parents community. Maybe it's something more like a church group. Do you have any sort of religious affiliations, and can you find support through a church community? Often there are resources through schools and school districts. It might just be something like support groups, or that they can put you in touch with other similar families. And then really, you will have to continue to build those connections within the community. You know, once you have a community that you relate to, that you feel like you belong, that's the first step. But then you have to continue to dig deeper and build even stronger connections within the community, so that you have individuals who you can rely on for support.
Okay, this next question is about parenting an individual who has, for lack of a better phrasing, high functioning autism. So somebody who is higher functioning, people don't always understand the invisibility of that diagnosis, and how to connect with other families or parents or community members to create support.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting how sometimes when a parent or a caregiver seeks support, they actually kind of get some backlash. The response is, it's not that bad for you. Look at what I'm dealing with. It's not that bad. And how invalidating, you know, regardless of the situation, it's bad for everyone. We all need that support. We all need that sometimes. So number one, I certainly think that it's okay to continue to assert the needs. If you're kind of getting that backlash that says you don't have it that bad, it is okay and needed for you to continue to say, yes, I do. This is where I need support. You should not have to educate. You shouldn't be expected to say, well, here's actually why things are really hard for me. This is actually what life is really like. You shouldn't have to do that, but the reality is you might. It may require finding a different sort of community, one that is more understanding, more accepting, or more willing to understand your situation. School, again, might be a good resource for that. Can they put you in touch with other families in similar situations? Does your child have any close social connections at school that you can continue to build upon? Maybe not for childcare, but you know, maybe for some of those social needs, maybe for an hour of respite. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
Great, thank you. This is a parent asking about getting support quickly. So maybe if they're maybe not in a crisis, but they're feeling a really urgent need. Can you talk at all? I know during the pandemic, a lot of online resources have evolved, and there's some new strategies. So can you speak to that at all if someone feels like they need some help quickly?
Do we think, are we thinking like a parent is so overwhelmed that they can't keep going, or like a crisis level problem with their child?
It sounds like a parent seeking just some mental health support. So some maybe counseling or strategizing.
Okay. So a lot of these, you know, building community, those kinds of ways of getting support, you're right, that's going to take time. there is no stepping away from your caregiver role, or at least for most people, there is no stepping away. Is there any way to step away from other responsibilities? Can you take PTO to take some time off work? Is there another family member who can take on what you're dealing with your parent while you're also trying to take care of your child? Is there someone who can help with some of the household tasks? There's no stepping away from some of your roles, but is it possible to delegate or step away from other of your roles? There are a lot of online mental health support options now, things like BetterHelp, or I think it's called Sondermind. Like, there's a lot of these online therapy tools and websites that are popping up. You know, the knowledge of the therapist about your conditions, what you're dealing with, being a burnt out parent of a child with autism, you don't know what that therapist is going to be experienced with or not. And that certainly it can be problematic and it can be a risk. But when the need is really urgent, it's a great starting point. And maybe if you can find a more experienced therapist down the road, or someone who's local who you can see in person, that's great. But these online resources are a really good starting point, and there's usually not a wait to get started with something like that. Okay, and all these little self-care activities that you're going to do throughout the day will help to bring it down. But of course, it might take some time for your nervous system to reset, even once you're taking care of yourself.
So one attendee said, I love your comment about community care. We need it, especially for parents of loved ones on the spectrum with complex needs.
Yes.
This parent's asking, or this person, I'm not sure if it's a parent or not, do you have any links for studies for BIPOC parents? So have you seen specific resources for that?
Yes. Can I send you resources, Denise, and you can pass it along? Is that a good way?
Yep, I can add them to the page.
Okay, great.
Well, we are running out of time, Amanda. So I really thank you for doing this presentation today. And sorry that we experienced a little bit of a technical glitch there at the beginning.
Yes, my apologies.
We can repair that. Yeah, no, that happens to all of us. We all have these internet connections to work with.
Right.
So everybody,
that the most important stuff was everyone could hear it.
And everyone can see the slides. So
okay, good.
We're good. So everybody who's still here, the quiz is now live. It's online at the link that we provided in your reminder email. It's also, the link is in the chat as well. So you can take that knowledge quiz. Tried to keep the questions pretty brief for the early part of the webinar. So that should be something that everyone can take now if you're interested. And be sure to check our website for our upcoming webinars. We've got more scheduled. We continue in February, and then throughout the year, we're already booking in November. So be sure to check out that page and get signed up. And we appreciate everybody who could be here today. And Amanda, we'll see you next time.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone.